The keynote speech will be delivered by Mr. James Choi, Australian ambassador to Korea with a non-resident accreditation to North Korea. And please join me in welcoming Mr. James Choi to this podium. Please give a big hand.
International Olympic Committee member and President of the International Sports Strategy Foundation, Mr. Yoo Sung-min. Member of the International Olympic Committee Executive Board, Mr. So Myung-nung. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege and honor to address this forum on the theme of peace through sport. As a keen marathon runner, cyclist, and a fan of all sports, and also as a diplomat in Australia's Foreign Service, the theme of this forum is something very close to my heart. Sport engages and brings our world together in a way that nothing else can. In our more diverse and individualized societies, sport is often the best, even the only bond that brings people and societies together, regardless of social, racial, and political background. It has an almost unmatched role to play in promoting understanding, healing wounds, and breaking down barriers. As the President of IOC mentioned, as he quoted President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, sport can change the world. Nelson Mandela was himself an exceptional testament to this. He, together with his inmates in the prison camp on Robben Island, experienced the positive effects of sport on their resistance, on their self-confidence, and their dignity. When Mandela, a black freedom fighter turned president, presented the 1995 Rugby World Cup trophy to the white Afrikaner captain of the South African rugby team, they instantly forged one of the country's defining images of racial unity. Sport became a symbol of reconciliation. It broke down racial barriers and changed South Africa forever. Sport has a unique power to attract, mobilize, and inspire. By its very nature, sport is about participation. It is about inclusion. It can create hope where there was once only despair. It stands for fairness and equality. It reflects human values such as respect for the opponent, acceptance of binding rules, and teamwork. Because it doesn't matter who you are, sport transcends boundaries, cultures, religions, and languages. And most importantly, sport can be used as a tool for peace and development. As defined in the Olympic Charter, the International Olympic Commission's mission is to place sport at the service of the harmonious development of humankind, with a view to promoting a peaceful society combined with the preservation of human dignity. Former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon paid the ultimate compliment to the Olympic movement by saying that Olympic principles are the United Nations principles. And the ultimate recognition of the role of sport in promoting peace and development came in 2009 when the International Olympic Committee was granted observer status at the United Nations. It represented an acknowledgement of the universality of sport. Indeed, sport is probably the most universal activity on this planet. Both the International Olympic Committee and the International Governing Federation of Football, FIFA, have more members than the United Nations. The Australian government has formally recognised the role of sports in international affairs. In 2005, the Australian government launched what we call sports diplomacy strategy. We are seeking to use a sports strategy to maximise people-to-people links and achieve key development objectives in the Asia-Pacific region. Our Sports for Development projects are seeking to improve social cohesion by bringing people and communities together. Our strategies seek to engage young people especially those in fragile states, helping them to learn important life skills, including leadership, teamwork, discipline, and perseverance. Social inclusion and understanding respect builds more cohesive and peaceful societies. So for Australia, sports diplomacy is working hand in hand with traditional forms of diplomacy. Sport has proven it can change the course of international affairs. In 1971, Cold War tensions were lessened thanks to an unlikely diplomatic tool, ping pong. The US table tennis team arrived in China on April 10, 1971, becoming the first group of Americans in over 20 years to travel behind China's then bamboo curtain. The visit actually occurred as a result of an accident. US table tennis player Glenn Cowan, during a competition in Japan, accidentally boarded the Chinese team's bus following a training session. And on that bus ride, Cowan formed a friendship with the Chinese table tennis team. This ultimately led to a Chinese government invitation for the US team to visit Beijing. These visits of table tennis teams became affectionately known as ping pong diplomacy, ultimately leading to the normalization of relations between China and the United States. In an interview with the New York Times, Chinese competitor Zhong Minji summed up his role in ping pong diplomacy perfectly. He said, "I knew I was not only there to play. More importantly, I was there to achieve what could not be done through proper diplomatic channels." More than 100 years ago, during World War I, we have one of the most famous stories of how sport can stop conflict, albeit for a brief moment. By Christmas 1914, almost 750,000 people had been killed. In the trenches of the front line, most of the soldiers on both sides were exhausted after bitter fighting. In some spots, the trenches were only 50 meters away, so the soldiers got to know each other quite well. But on Christmas Day, an informal truce started to emerge. Soldiers from both sides started to lift their heads from the parapet. Both sides started to exchange messages over no man's land. German and British soldiers ventured out from the trenches and started to shake hands and wished each other Merry Christmas. And how do men without a common language express friendship? They play football. Christmas football games erupted. The games weren't serious. Most lasted an hour or so. Several hundred soldiers took part. Players who fell in the mud were pulled out by the enemy to cheers from the spectators from both sides. In this brief moment, they reflected on their common humanity and forgot about war. Football brought bitter enemies together in peace and harmony. The photos of German and British soldiers playing football on the front lines are etched in history. Sport can be used to cross divides between countries. It can overcome the most deep-rooted conflicts and tensions. I recall with fond memories the experience of attending the Sydney 2000 Olympics when Jung Eun-sun, a female basketball player from South Korea, and Park Jong-chol, a male judo coach from the north, led the joint Korean team grasping the flag of unification, a single blue and white flag depicting the Korean peninsula. At that moment, there was no south or north. The pains of a divided peninsula were forgotten. There was one Korea. And I recall the thunderous applause washing over the Korean athletes and the remaining participants and audience as they marched into the Olympic Stadium. The joint march of a Korean team was a true example of the power of sports to bring people together. I personally am passionate about sports. So I am looking forward tremendously, along with a good proportion of the planet's population, to the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. As we get closer to that opening ceremony, I am reminded of the invitation that remains open for North Korea to participate in the Pyeongchang Olympics. And right after the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018, the 2020 Summer Olympics will be held in Tokyo, and the 2022 Winter Olympics will be held in Beijing. These sequence of Summer and Winter Olympics provides a fantastic opportunity to build peace and cooperation within the Northeast Asian region. I sincerely hope that this vision can be realized. Ladies and gentlemen, the holding of this forum, especially in the lead up to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, is a timely reminder of the role that sports can play in reducing tensions and encouraging dialogue and harmony. I wish you well in your important discussions. On a final but equally important note, I want to underline how sport can also help people look anew at those with disabilities and provides a valuable role for integration. We should not overlook the role of the Paralympics and the Special Olympics in focusing on what people can do rather than what they cannot. That principle in itself should underpin greater understanding within and across societies. It should promote a sense of tolerance among all peoples throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. James Che, for your inspiring speech.